All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is France Hong. I am the co-founder and CEO of Boodle AI, the makers of Boodlebox, and welcome to this week's AI Collaborative. We are absolutely delighted this week to have Margit Brazda Poirier as our guest this week. Welcome, Margit.
Thank you, France. I'm so excited to be here. I know that I've talked with Sean Olds in the past. Meredith and I have been in touch, so I'm really excited to meet you and chat with you today.
Great. Well, let's dive right into it. So the subject today is leveraging AI to maximize nonprofit grant impact. And I'd love to start with your background and what inspired you to found Grants4Good, because I think you have just an amazing background for the work you do.
Well, thanks, France. I started this company. It was really not planned out. It was early on when I left graduate school. I worked in the field of environmental science, so I was always more of a biology, math, tech geek, and loved every moment of it. And so my first job out of graduate school was with local government, and it happened to be the early 90s. And you know what else happened in the early 90s? The World Wide Web came on the scene and people started talking about the internet. And I remember one day asking my supervisor at the time, could I attend this new training about a technology called the internet? And she said yes, and I went. And look where we are now. So, fast forward 30 years, here we're talking about generative AI. So, yeah, I worked in the scientific tech field for quite a while and ultimately got involved with grant writing because we'd have budget cuts. So I had to self teach myself all the grant writing skills. And at one point, I became the executive director of a rather large New York based foundation. So I got to see what is it like to make those critical decisions about which nonprofits get the grant awards and how much. And it really gave me a lot of insight. And ultimately, I started Grants4Good in 2009 when I saw that there was a need for nonprofits to really have somebody help them develop strong, compelling grant proposals. They needed help finding the best foundations and government grants to apply to. And so that's where we came in, 15 years as of today.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations on
Yeah,
15
thank
years.
you.
Margaret, I love that you have a background on the other side of the equation. You were at a foundation, you were seeing all these grant proposals, you understand exactly how the sausage is being evaluated. So you're in a great position to help other people make
Mhm.
sausage, right? But with that perspective, what are some of the key challenges nonprofits face when it comes to grant management? And how do you think AI can address those challenges?
So there is a lot of data out there to answer that question, and my own experience also mirrors that data. And basically, when a large pool of nonprofit leaders and staff are asked what are their biggest challenges with obtaining grant funding, two things constantly emerge: lack of time and lack of staff. And that may not come as a surprise for anyone who's worked in a nonprofit. Lack of time, lack of staff are very critical. Lack of funding clearly is part of that as well, because if you had the funding, you'd have more of the staff too. So those are the two big challenges. And when I think about AI and what it can do for nonprofits, it can help you streamline tasks, which means save you time. And although it can't replace people, it can't replace the expertise, the years of knowledge you've built in the profession. It can not add staff necessarily, but I like to treat AI as an assistant, a virtual assistant. And I can talk more a little bit about that too. But those are really the two big challenges I see.
Yeah, one of the things I often say to people is if you can't create A plus work without AI, you're not going to create it only using AI. In other
Right.
words, AI gets you only so far. It gets you that B minus C plus solution. And it really takes a human with expertise and knowledge and experience to take it to that last, bit to get it to an A plus. And so,
Yeah.
Margaret, what do you talk us through practical strategies? What's the practical way that a nonprofit, I'm sure we've got a number of nonprofit professionals joining the webinar today.
Mm.
Let's go to brass tacks. How can they integrate AI into their grant management workflow?
Yeah, I want to come back to a point you just made, France, that you have to know something about your field to do well in that field and use AI. So, for example, if you've already started using AI, you know what I mean by a prompt bar. And if you're new to it, if you get onto Chat GPT, let's say, the most popular generative AI platform right now that has a free and a paid version, but if you started using that, for example, or Boodle AI, you have to know what to put into a prompt bar. And that's essentially you giving a question or a command to the generative AI platform. And so without good, thorough knowledge of best practices in your fields, that's going to be challenging. So, um, one of the questions I often get is, will AI replace my job? Well, I can't speak for other sectors, but I know as a grant professional, we do so much more than churn out words, right? We
Okay.
advise clients. We critically look at funders and are they a good fit for our nonprofit? We have to make very persuasive arguments that match funder interests in order to get grant funding. We have to understand how to read requests for proposals, which can be 100 pages long in a government grant, for example. So I don't see that replacement happening soon, but I do see the assistant, it serving as an assistant. And here's one fun practical thing I ask people to do is imagine if you had a part-time assistant or even full-time right now by your side, and you could make a list of all the things that you would like to get off your plate, things that take too much of your time that you don't want to do. Make that list and then start experimenting with AI to see which one of those things could it do for you or with you. What could it assist you with?
Mhm.
Maybe you don't like looking for new grant opportunities. It takes up too much of your time. Well, AI can help with that. Maybe you don't like editing. AI can do that. Maybe you don't even like sitting down and starting letters because they just feel like a waste of time. Again, you can prompt AI to do that. So those are some practical ways that I have found nonprofits are using it.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I developed a prompt sheet because prompt engineering is this phrase that scares people. They think engineering, I'm not an engineer. I took a prompt engineering course online through Coursera, and it was great. It was just virtual from my own home, and I learned some great ways to use AI, to train AI. But what I've done is I've developed a 2-page prompt engineering guide that I can definitely offer up to all listeners today, and it'll help get you started.
Great. We put your contact information in the chat, so everyone please check it out. Feel free to contact
Yeah.
Margit. We also put a link to Grants4Good, and so easy enough to get a hold of it that way. You mentioned all these different potential use cases for generative AI and experimentation, which I think is a fantastic recommendation. I often tell people, you think of a generative AI as like the dumbest smart person you've ever met. Like they don't know what they don't know. And so you've got to exercise that judgment, right? It's almost like an intern who is tireless and super motivated, but they don't know bad from good. And so they'll do
Yeah.
whatever you tell them to do, but it's up to you to actually take that work and determine whether it's good or not. So you mentioned funding research. I think that's in my work with nonprofits and Boodlebox and talking to them, this is a keen area
Hmm.
of interest. Like, how do I find the
Right.
opportunities? And then after I find those opportunities, how do I optimize those grant applications? So how have you used AI to tackle those two tasks?
Sure. I mean, to address finding the best funding research, back when I started Grants4Good in 2009, this was a very time-consuming task. In that time, I was really using the internet, obviously, but also going to resources at a library. I was subscribing to some databases that would help me with that, but they weren't as sophisticated as they are now. So fast forward to today, and there are so many incredible companies that have started funding databases to make your search quicker and easier so that you can get in and put in all the parameters you're looking for. You're looking for youth mentoring programs specifically for teenagers located in an urban setting in the Northeast US. You can be very specific and get results. Those, excuse me, those databases do cost money. I find them worth it when you find the right one. But we know that a lot of our nonprofit listeners are also operating under a very restrictive budget. So we've got to be real about what is
Right.
really possible. And so a good starting point is AI. And what I would recommend with AI is you can simply ask, um, please, I always use the word please. I don't know why. It's my manners are growing up. I'll say to AI, please help me find 20 funders that are best suited to my nonprofit. The mission of our nonprofit is to find permanent housing for women who are homeless that have children in the New York City region. So I can be even more specific than that, but that was literally 2 sentences that I used. And I can guarantee the outcome will be a list of 20 funders whose mission is involved in exactly what you said. Now, having said that, this is your starting point. Remember, this is your starting point. It just saved you a ton of time from going through databases and doing the research. But now you have 20 foundations where you can go to their website, you can check their very detailed guidelines, you can read their RFPs, and you can see if you are in fact a good fit. So it saves you a lot of time in that regard.
And that's great, Margit. So there's a lot of different AI models out there. You mentioned OpenAI's ChatGPT, of course, Anthropic has got Claude 3 Opus, which we happen to be big fans of Boodlebox, though we offer a number of models, Gemini, Llama
Yeah,
3.
Gemini is great.
Yeah.
Real-time data. Yep. I recommend that one for funding searches.
Oh, great. You do
Yeah.
recommend Gemini
Yeah.
1?
Or also the paid Chat GPT version.
Got it.
Definitely the paid one.
How about Perplexity? That's been getting a lot of press for being connected to the internet and providing internet sourcing. Have you tried
It
Perplexity or
has. I haven't done much specifically with Perplexity. What amazes me about this whole field is just how quickly it's growing. So we
Mhm.
know that at the end of 2022, there was OpenAI that released publicly its ChatGPT, the free version. And that initial version looks so elementary compared to what's out there now. And we know it's going to change radically. And also, so many great software companies have started their own companies just to help our sector. So we appreciate that work. One thing I advise people to do, because it can be overwhelming, all the products that are out there, is to pick one or two and get to know it. If you need a free subscription or a trial period, go with it and test it out as much as you can to see what you like, because otherwise you may have that decision overload where you say, this is too much for me. And I have heard concerns from clients, from other webinars I've taught, that go something like this. They say, I already have so much on my plate working for a nonprofit that I don't have time to learn one more thing. And I understand. And I think of this though as, yeah, there is a little bit of a learning curve, but boy, the payoff will be worth it. You will save so much time when you get started with using one or two platforms.
Yeah, and obviously that's one of the reasons why we built Boodlebox was to provide one platform you can learn the interface and then have access to all those models we just talked about. OpenAI, Anthropic, Perplexity, Gemini, they're all in there. You learn one
Perfect.
interface, you're able to access them all, and they also bring in your knowledge. So let's switch over to lower down or farther down in the work stream. So one of the things that nonprofits often think about for AI is how do they leverage that for stronger relationships with funders? So would love to hear some of your best practices in that category.
Yeah. So let's say you've now done some funding research, and imagine you have found some funders that you really think you're a good fit with, your nonprofit work. A next step would be to make contact with that funder, because you don't want to be that one anonymous grant application that just shows up in their pile of 1,000 applications. So making a contact, whether it's a foundation funder or a government grant program officer, that's something you want to make sure you do. And oftentimes people say, well, how do I do that? I'm kind of concerned about making that first call or that first contact. So one thing I advise people to do is to use AI at least in two different ways. One, it can help you develop a letter of introduction, or a letter of inquiry, as it's often called. And you can instruct your prompt bar, your generative AI assistant, to develop a one-page letter of inquiry to the XYZ Foundation about our organization. Again, you can put in the mission of your organization or a description of your detailed program that you're looking for funding for. Put in as much as you want and see what you get in a one-page letter. It's a great draft. And France, we were talking about this before we went live, and we both strongly agree that AI is great for drafts. It never substitutes for your knowledge, your own authentic voice. And I really, really advise people never to take something that was generated by AI and immediately send it out. You always want to look through, edit, make sure there isn't any inherent bias located, because we do know that there are some biases in AI, especially particular towards marginalized communities. So we want to make sure our language reflects the language we would use. We want to make sure the data is accurate. So check any references that you might get through your AI result.
Yeah,
But yeah, the LOI is great. The other is, what about that pitch? When you finally call and you reach a funder and they answer the phone, you say, oh, what do I say now? So I've used AI and I've instructed, ask clients, I said, try this out. Put in a request that says, please help me say this in 2 minutes or less. And then you can write everything you want and it'll condense it for you.
Yeah,
It's
100,
pretty neat.
100% agree. I treat it like an intern, a very well-intentioned, very eager intern, but you'd never give an intern a task and then immediately take it, don't check it, and publish it, or give it to your CEO, or give it to a
Yeah,
funder, right? There's no way. So yes, absolutely, I agree. Have it do the draft, and then you put the polish and the verification on it. I've also seen
absolutely.
it the opposite, where you do the draft and then use AI to double check, right? In terms of like, hey, give me an opinion on this. And you've done all the work before. You're just asking for a second opinion, which is another kind of interesting way to
That's
use
a
it.
great use, France. I've had many clients use it for exactly that, where they may already have been writing a lot of grant applications, so they don't want to start fresh, but they may have just encountered a grant application that's online, as they almost always are, that has a word limit of describe, your need statement in 200 words or less. And that becomes very difficult when you're so close to a topic. So that's where I find generative AI to often take your content and shrink it down, edit it. I can ask it to use a specific format, maybe use 4 bullet points, or any other kind of way I want it described.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
How about some real world examples? You're working with a lot of nonprofits. Any success stories to inspire our attendees and listeners about using AI and their grant programs and getting real world results?
Yeah, I mean, one is definitely that editing tool. I think people feel safer using that editing tool because they already know that they've got the content knowledge and it's just changing that. I have found clients that I consult with and that I teach through my webinars. I've found them have a great deal of success with the funding search. That earlier example that I mentioned, the funding search. The other one is, here's one that's a real sticking point for people, and that is evaluation. So as a nonprofit or business or grant pro writing grant applications, you know that we can't just write projects that we know we believe in and we want funded. We have to have some kind of way to measure the impact of those programs. Essentially, we need an evaluation plan. How do we know we've moved the bar in any way due to our work?
Right.
And so early on, I was challenging GPT and recently Gemini, and I asked it to develop some SMART objectives for me. And SMART is that acronym that means specific, measurable, achievable, time sensitive, and realistic. I just switched that order, but SMART objectives. And I like to give it more specific instruction to say that reflect the success in terms of percentages of participants in a program.
Yeah.
And then I will give some specific data, maybe about past programs that nonprofit has run, or just anything else to help develop those. You would be amazed the results. I was. I didn't think it could do that or logic models very well, and yet it did both.
Yeah, we'll have to find time to connect on that later. I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah,
And
play around with that. It was really neat. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to go over to Q&A here in just a moment. So one final question for you.
Sure.
So for those nonprofits that are just starting on their Gen AI journey, what advice do you have for them to have a successful implementation and see real world results?
It's going to sound really simple, but I would say just jump right in and get started because you don't want to overthink this. I would say get a trial subscription or a free application and just start working with it. Start experimenting it. You have nothing to lose. The only one caution I would say, and this is a very valid concern among a lot of people I speak with, especially in a lot of talks like this, and that's about data privacy. People say, what happens to my data once it's out there,
Yeah.
once it's in there? And so one thing, without going into a whole lot of details, I'm sure, France, you could speak to this too for a long time about what really happens behind the scenes. But in a nutshell, I just advise people don't put anything in the prompt bar that is private. In other words, a donor's personal address, information, wealth, anything that you wouldn't be able to just Google and find out, I would not put it in there. So I would just use that caution. And just jump in and experiment with it because once you see ways that it can save you time, you will probably start to use it a little bit more frequently. I don't know if this will show up in your camera. I have a little post-it note on my computer because I have to remind myself. I always say, how can AI help?
Yeah.
And I have this here because as much as I talk about AI, I forget to use it. So I have that reminder. How can it help? How can I save some time?
Yeah, I love that, Margaret. So I'm the co-founder of a Gen AI company, right?
Yeah.
Even I have to do the same thing. Like I have to constantly like poke myself 10 times a day, like,
Good, I'm glad I'm
oh
not the
yeah.
only one.
Well, it's because we don't have the muscle memory on
Right.
how to use this technology, right? We have
Yeah.
20 years of I push a button or I enter a formula and I get a result out, right? We don't,
Yeah.
or I enter a search term and I get search results. We don't have the muscle memory of how to use this technology that frankly can do anything we want it to do if we just ask it the right way or bring in the right AI at the right time. And so that's gonna take a whole nother set of habits and skills.
It will, and it is definitely a habit to form. I'll just mention again, I know that it's in the chat, but there's a link to my Grants for Good website contact page. If you would like me to send you those prompts that you can get started with for fundraising and grant writing, all you need to do is go to that contact page, subscribe to my email newsletter. You'll hear about more webinars coming up. And then in the page, just request that you'd like me to send you that, and I'll get right on it. You'll get it today. It'll help you at least get started so you don't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, no, getting started is the key. Once you start getting
Mhm.
started, you get some value, you'll start seeing other use cases. Okay, we're gonna open for Q&A. We've got
Great.
one question already, which is about hallucinations. So there's a problem sometimes when you use any of these models, right? And you're searching for something that the AI makes up content. So have you run into that and how do you solve for that?
Yeah, I have run into that. What I've often done is I will, before I ask a question where I don't know the answer, I might ask a question where I do. So I'll give you an example. I'm very familiar with the foundations located in Rochester, New York, which is where I'm based.
Mhm.
And so I have asked ChatGPT or Gemini, what are 10 foundations that are likely to fund youth programs taking place in Rochester, New York? And what I got, and this was early on, it's getting better as time goes on, but what I got early on was one foundation was mentioned twice, and another foundation was mentioned that is out of business. It's a corporate foundation that is no longer even in business. And then there was another one mentioned that I know does not give grants anymore. And so they're not necessarily hallucinations. I know that's somewhat different, but it does speak to checking the results for accuracy that you receive from any generative AI platform. So that is important. Now, when you don't know the answers, I'm not familiar with funders in Cleveland, Ohio, right off, the top of my head. So if I were to do that, I would definitely want to research and look at each of those 10 funders to see which one is correct.
Yeah, no, that's great, Margaret. And One thing we'll have to try, maybe we'll jump on a different call and do this, is in Boodlebox, you can bring in different AIs from different ecosystems into the same chat. So you could ask ChatGPT for the results and then ask Claude 3 to double check ChatGPT's work. And so there's an interesting thing where you can use AI to check AIs. And I've had
Well,
some.
what would be interesting is to see that demonstrated, and also just slightly off the topic. I
Yeah.
read a lot about AI, and I'm fascinated by one of the blogs, Deb Streff is her name, and she has written a whole series comparing different software out there. And I'm just finding I'm always learning more about which one is better at certain things than others. I
Yeah.
mean, that would be a great Boodle AI topic, is, which ones, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each of these, knowing that it'll probably change a month later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is
Yeah,
a fast-changing field. Okay,
yeah,
let's see if we've got any other questions. And it doesn't look like we do this time. I'm sure folks that want to follow up you can contact you
yeah,
at that
sure.
grants4, that's number 4good.com
Mhm.
/contact. So Margit Brazda Poirier, thank you for being our guest. For those of you who enjoyed this session, please check out boodlebox.ai and the Learning Hub for future AI collaborative sessions. We're also putting this on our YouTube channel, so check out @Boodle AI on YouTube. We're going to have a lot more content like this. So, Margit, any closing comments before we let our audience go today?
I want to thank you for inviting me on here, and I really do want to encourage nonprofits to start using these tools. And don't be discouraged if you're a smaller nonprofit with a smaller budget and not a lot of staff. This is great for you. So give it a go, and let's stay in touch.
Great. Thanks, Margit. And
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone for joining today.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.